всички да имаха добър обяд, вкусен, и да са готови за още една-две сесии.
Jak to już masz?
Wziąłeś sobie słuchawkę, nie wziąłem.
Can you hear me? Ah, yeah. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. I know this is a little bit of a challenging session, and I'm not just talking and I'm not just saying this because of the content, but I know that after lunch it's always a little bit more difficult to stay like. But the good news is that we have a wonderful panel that I'm sure you will be listening very carefully and with a lot of interest. And of course, I wanted to thank the organizers for having invited me to moderate this panel. My name is Silvia Chocarro. I work for IFEX, International Freedom of Expression Exchange. For those who are not familiar with IFEX, we are a network of 120 NGOs in 65 countries around the world promoting freedom of expression. And so actually one of the co-organizers today, Reporters Sans Frontières, is a member of IFEX, for example. So, and it's here today. I want to start the session. Before giving the floor to the speakers, I wanted to start by reading a very short text. It's just a paragraph that I would like you to listen carefully, because I will ask you something afterwards. That's not an exam, but just to make sure that you are listening to me. So this is the paragraph. We, the journalists, continue to be victims of harassment, physical assault, threats, arrest, detention, abductions, exile. Journalists are also subject to economic and political pressure, misuse of existing laws, and further restrictions under new laws. Who in this room thinks that actually this paragraph would more or less describe the situation that we are currently living? Someone think that more or less describe the situation? Okay, I see some hands, so I'm assuming it's yes. Okay, thank you. The interesting thing is that this paragraph was written now 21 years ago here in Sofia. 21 years ago here in Sofia in 1997, there was a big conference on media freedom. It was taking place here in Sofia because it was at a moment which it was considered that in Eastern Europe it was a very dynamic region where actually media freedom was really flourishing. And so UNESCO, in this case, decided to organize this big media freedom conference on May 3rd, which is the World Press Freedom Day. They did it here in Sofia. And there was a Sofia declaration that was mentioned this morning, and by Theodorov Zahov. I don't know if I have pronounced your name correctly. He mentioned this declaration this morning, and actually he challenged us to read it. So I read it. And this is the paragraph that I decided to extract to show two things. One it might sound a little bit pessimistic, which is 21 years later, actually, we are facing very similar challenges. However, I also think that we have advanced a lot. We have developed a lot of frameworks that didn't exist at that moment. And the good news is that we are doing this conference today precisely to find solutions. So maybe we are facing similar challenges, but hopefully from now on we are not going to face them, or we are going to face them differently so we can actually address them and find solutions. And this is something that we are going to talk today with the panelists. So to talk about all of these challenges and solutions, and specifically in 3 countries, we have these panels, that we have these 6 panelists. And today, in this session, we are going to talk about Poland, about Hungary, and about Czech Republic. Those are the 3 countries we are going to talk about. The first, just to explain a little bit how the session is going to work. The first part of the conversation, we are going to talk a little bit about threats and challenges. And it's not that we want to focus on the bad things, but it's, of course, necessary for us to exchange information. This morning, I think it was Mark, sorry, I forgot the surname. It was talking about solidarity. I think actually for building empathy and solidarity, exchange information is crucial. So, and to know what's going on with our colleagues in other countries. So in that regard, I think to exchange that and to analyze what are the threats and challenges is important. And then, as I mentioned, the second part of the session will be more focused on solutions. And I'm going to be asking the panelists as concrete as possible, proposals and solutions that we can go out today here with some ideas in our minds and maybe hopefully put them into work. And I have asked the panelists to try to be short so we can try to have a conversation. They also know that they can interact between each other in the sense that if someone wants to react to a comment from someone else, you know, you can do it. So feel free, please, to do so. And I'm going to be introducing them instead of all of them at this point once they are going to be talking for the first time, because otherwise then by the time the last person is going to speak is going to do so, maybe people do not remember who that person is. So I'm going to start today with Tomasz Piatek. He's an investigative journalist in Poland. He's the author of the book Macierewicz, I don't know how I pronounce it, and the secret, no, sorry.
And his secrets.
Exactly, his secrets, in which he reveals the connections of the former Poland's defense minister with people who have ties to Russian intelligence and mafia, correct? In response to this, Tomasz has faced actually serious threats and challenges that he's going to talk about. The good news too is I think there is some kind of happy ending in some way, and that happy ending, it's also the result of some kind of solidarity and cooperation with other organizations. So in some way, it's also a good example on how we can deal with some issues. So Tomasz, sorry, it would be very interesting if you can then talk a little bit about your case, and also if you can explain a little bit if you see your case as an isolated case, or is actually something that it's in a context and it happened to other people in your country.
I'm a happy man because my case was one of the more loud and known, but it's not absolutely isolated, as Bartosz Wielinski from Gazeta Wyborcza can tell you, because a lot of journalists in Poland are harassed and legally prosecuted. My case was very bizarre because I published a book about the Polish Minister of Defense ties to Kremlin, to Russian mafia and Russian secret services. It was very thoroughly documented, so the minister didn't dare to sue me. Instead of doing a civil suit, he denounced me to a military prosecutor for terrorism. And so I faced a sentence of 3 years in jail. Also, I was sued in civil and penal way by many people and companies from Russian mafia I wrote about. Also, I had to sue some people who wrote brazen lies about me because this legal prosecution was linked to a huge prosecution in the media, harassment or denigrating campaign. When I was in the government-owned or government-friendly media, I was shown as a madman or as a member of international anti-Polish conspiracy. I was attacked because of my religious confession, because I'm not Roman Catholic, I'm a Protestant, so there was this kind of argument that because I'm Protestant, I hate all Roman Catholics, and the minister is Roman Catholic, so this is why I started to attack him. I was invigilated. Some people pretending to be police entered the apartment of my parents without showing any authorization or badge. They said some lies about the reason of the interruption of the breaking in, and they left the apartment. My phone was hacked. I was also physically attacked. I received emails in which some men proposed me drugs, and after a short investigation, I discovered this man was a Ministry of Defense contractor. And for some months, I waked at 6 a.m. At 6 a.m. in the morning because I was afraid of being arrested. And thanks to solidarity, thanks to help of other journalists from Gazeta Wyborcza, from other Polish independent media, thanks to huge help from Reporters Without Borders organization, thanks to the help of European publishers, and not only European, also some American publishers who wrote about my case. I won, we won. The minister was dismissed. Almost all his co-workers were dismissed, and the case against me was dropped. I'm still having my 14 cases in the court, but but I'm no more denounced for suspect of terrorism. What it meant for me, from the practical point of view, it means that I'm still working 20 hours a day to expose all the ministers' ties and the Russian mafia activities in Poland, because I want to expose this network of influences thoroughly, and I feel more than like a soldier than a journalist, but I'm still a journalist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. And very interesting to see how actually the support of your colleagues in the country, but also outside, actually helped with your case. Maybe one of the ideas for the Sofia Declaration for future work is actually to see how this can be done not in isolated case, but in a more coordinated and structural way. So we make sure that when this happened to one of us, or we have some kind of emergency mechanism or something, or reaction mechanism to that in a more coordinated way, because in the end, it might actually be successful, like in your case. So I'm going to move to Mirosław Wielinski. He is the director of the Department of Constitutional, International, and European Law at the Office of the Polish Ombudsman. And Mirosław, I'm pretty sure that, well, the case of Tomasz is not new for you, but not only because of his particular case, but I would assume, I don't know, that's something that you are going to tell us. If you have seen similar cases like this in your work. So if you can tell us about a little bit, what are the most common threats or challenges that you are dealing with from the Office of the Ombudsman in Poland right now?
Okay, thank you very much. Tomasz Piatek's case was exceptional, so there was no, I would say, such case, but we have, of course, different problems. Nevertheless, for some years I've been a journalist, but I'm a lawyer now, so I will concentrate on the legal developments very shortly and in brief. That actually we have those peculiar problems for the last 2.5 years when the law on especially public radio and television was changed. It was called a small amendment by which the Ministry of Treasure got the power to nominate all members of boards and supervisory boards of public television and radio, so it was like a political nominations. So it was very fast when the new government achieved direct political control over all bodies, but it's not the end, because many, and I must say hundreds, and we monitor those cases, hundreds of journalists were sacked from jobs from public radio and television. It was just last week we supported a case of Jerzy Sosnowski, and the Labor Court declared he was sacked illegally, and I expect more such judgments to come. But at the end of the day, the public radio and television is directly controlled by the government. I must say that this law was challenged by the Ombudsman in the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court managed to declare this law in 2016 be unconstitutional. Unfortunately, this judgment, even it was published by the Prime Minister, which sometimes may seem exceptional for those judgments the government doesn't like, is not implemented. And the Ombudsman asked the Minister of Culture, who has the competence to initiate the legislative process, to implement this judgment. The judgment itself said that the new law circumvents the competences of the National Broadcasting Council. This is the constitutional body whose competence is to nominate boards and supervisory boards of public media. Unfortunately, still, I must say, the legal scheme in Poland is illegal. What the Constitutional Court added, that the new parliament circumvented again the National Broadcasting Council by establishing a completely new body, a National Council of Media, whose the only competence is to nominate. After it was changed, it was taken from the Ministry of Treasury to this new body elected by the parliament, in which, of course, the parliamentary majority has majority. So I must say that according to this jurisprudence, also this new body is actually acting illegally, circumventing the constitutional powers of the National Broadcasting Council. So this is actually the legal network we have to live with. And it's the direct effect of this that the public main information channel, when I call it government propaganda, it will not be, I would say it will be the shortest explanation of how it operates. Apart from these changes in the public media, there is also different examples and aspects of how the private media are pressured. Of course, we have private media market, but they have a lot of problems. It's so many examples that it's difficult to explain them everything in such a short time slot. But public treasury companies do not advertise in those media the government doesn't like. It's even not unofficially, but the Ministry of Public Offices do not commission those press titles which are not in the political mainstream of the government. Of course, there are many other problems like freezing effects of some laws. The defamation law in the penal code still operates, even if this was the ruling party was the loudest saying that this article 212 in the penal code has to be suppressed. And after they regain the power, they say it will stay like this. Apart from this, there is, I would say, apart from purely media, there are problems regarding freedom of speech, regarding other freedoms, like freedom of assembly. So, of course, maybe you know that there were special monthly celebrations before the President's Palace to celebrate the tragic crash in Smolensk. But those people shouting, taking part in other manifestations, were persecuted by police. Even shouting Lech Wałęsa on the street was punished by police because it was a problem for the others. They didn't like to hear it. There are other examples. One example is from the last week, which actually is something completely new, and I'm really devastated by this. That you can just imagine the police coming to this conference room, taking your notes, making notes what the conference is about, checking whether it's legal. This was a conference in Pobierowo, the conference on the Karl Marx political thinking and other leftist thinkers, also Frankfurt School. The prosecutor office commissioned the police to come to the conference to check whether it is not violating law, making photos, taking notes, and registering people participating. This is, in the Ombudsman opinion, directly violating freedom of science. And also it's like there was a big statement by the Conference of Polish Rectors and Universities that the police is going much too far. So it's just to give you some glimpse of what's going on also in other areas than public media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were talking about public service broadcasting, or independence or not of the public service broadcasting, which actually I'm sure is not only a problem of Poland. It happens in many countries in Europe, unfortunately. Yes. And so once we move, we are continue with Poland, but once we move to Czech Republic and Hungary, actually I would be also interested in knowing if there is also these problems with the public service broadcasting. It was also interesting that you mentioned freedom of assembly, for example, and these kind of things. For example, at IFEX, we work on freedom of expression in general, so it's not only about media freedom, and we are also dealing a lot with these issues that there is also more and more threats and harassment against civil society, people that are going to demonstrations or protesting, and not necessarily journalists only. So. Yeah. And you mentioned also private media, the withdrawal of state advertisement in some private media to actually have a huge economic impact on those media. And I think our next speaker knows a little bit about this and about other type of, I would say, judicial harassment tools and strategies to try to silence media. So our next speaker is Bartosz Wielinski, and he is the head of the foreign department of the Polish, head of the foreign department at the Gazeta Wyborcza in Poland. So can you tell us a little bit about your story? Because I think there is a lot of, some of different threats that that have been mentioned here, like all these ways of finding how to use judiciary actually to harass or to put pressure on independent media.
Yeah, thank you for your invitation to this noble conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Gazeta Wyborcza is a symbol of free and democratic Poland. It was the very first media outlet which was free and independent and created in communist bloc. The first issue was printed on 8 May 1989. Poland was still a People's Republic. There was a Berlin Wall standing and no prospect for such a rash demolition of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. We exist since 1989. Adam Michnik, a famous Polish dissident, intellectual, author, publicist, is still our editor-in-chief. I've been with him to Vienna 2 days ago. He had a speech at other media conference describing the, well, sad and hard situation in our country. Adam Michnik is still in charge since the beginning of the Gazeta, and Gazeta became not only a journal, not only a media outlet, but an institution, democratic institution which aggregates all reformist, progressive, pro-European, humanistic powers in Poland. We are the journal, the daily, which emanated with humanitarian European values, trying to transform our country into modern, open, democratic, truly European society. And if we had this conference 3 years ago, I'd say we have totally succeeded in that Poland became a stable, vital, well, effective, normal country of Western civilization, and we should be proud of that. Suddenly the government changed and everything changed in Poland. And my media outlet, for which I've been working for 20 years, became the most important enemy of new government. Gazeta embodied openness, democracy, Europe, liberalism, freedom, desire for freedom. And this new government is very skeptical about all these values. And Mr. Kaczyński, the leader of Law and Justice Party, which is now ruling in Poland, also tried to found his own newspaper in the 90s, and he failed. And probably the personal jealousy and personal failure is also, well, there's also an engine. There's also gives him power, makes this thing personal. That's what should be said. So Gazeta Wyborcza is hated by them. They hate us. They simply hate us. Adam Michnik is of Jewish origin. I have many friends of Jewish origin, and of course it also plays its role in all those hate campaign that Gazeta Wyborcza is not pure Polish, is not truly Polish, is not patriotic enough, and we had those slanders since the beginning, almost since the beginning of Gazeta Wyborcza. Now it's being replicated, but you know that in time of this strife with Israel about law on Holocaust, even in published Polyak TV, you had the jokes on Holocaust and Jews, and one TV anchor says even that the Jews were killing themselves in concentration camps. So. This is Poland of today. So Gazeta Wyborcza is the enemy of the government, and they started the battle, the fight with us right after the rise into power. At the beginning, they tried to, well, hunger us out economically. Simply and suddenly, all state companies and the government itself resigned from any type of advertising in Gazeta Wyborcza. As every other national journal, we receive, well, good sum of money for advertisement from official sources, from the sources of state companies, and suddenly this stream of money was cut, nothing, zero. And they canceled all the subscriptions. The Deputy Minister of Justice said that no court in Poland is allowed to have a subscription of Gazeta Wyborcza. And it was a huge blow for us. No subscriptions, no advertisement, even, you know, the state company which runs a network of petrol stations in Poland decided to hide our issues, our printed Gazeta Wyborcza, somewhere under the shelves or even they decided not to sell us, just to make us bleed. And of course, we're bleeding. We had a bad time. We lost, I'm not a specialist of numbers, but let's say that's, well, about 20% since then in terms of selling of paper. And, but we survived. We have been blown hardly, but we have survived. So the new idea is to try a judicial approach. Many state companies felt offended by our reporting, and they filed complaints and sued us in courts, demanding, of course, compensation for being slandered. So imagine that when the ruling party controls the judiciary, in spite of all the protests of the European Commission, the control of the judiciary is being, well, taken over, and we could assume that there will be no free independent court in Poland. If we are sued for, let's say, 1 million zloty, that's 250,000 euro, the judge could receive a call from someone from the Ministry of Justice with an appeal that he should behave patriotic, should be true Polish judge, and sentence this anti-Polish, anti-patriotic Gazeta Wyborcza for, well, a reasonable fine. And if we get yearly, 5 or 6 fines for million zloty, we are dead, or almost dead. So that's the way they're trying to implement against us. And the third part are the prosecutors. So Tomasz Piatek adventure with the prosecution office hopefully has been ended with the demotion of a Polish defense minister. But my friend Wojciech Czuchnowski has a problem with the chairwoman of the Constitutional Tribunal. Chairwoman was appointed by the ruling party in a dubious way. And Wojciech Czuchnowski written a story about her and her husband, a head deputy, past in Polish intelligence service. Because her husband was an informant to the communist-era secret service in the 80s. Then Czuchnowski has found evidences that he was also an active agent for the Polish intelligence after the change of the regime, and the deputy of chairwoman of the Constitutional Tribunal was, in the 90s, was his supervisor in intelligence service. So we have a Constitutional Tribunal with intelligence connections. And the question is, if this is right, that the highest judicial body has connections to intelligence service. We don't find it acceptable that judges were agents of intelligence before. And what was the reaction of the chairwoman? She didn't start it a civil way. She demanded that the prosecutor office started an investigation against the author, claiming that she, as a state organ, as the organ of the state, were attacked, which is also punishable by the prison up till 3 years. Unfortunately, I have written a small passage of this article, so I could also be charged of that. And, well, that would be funny if I would be. Nobody was charged till now, but the investigation lasts. And we also know that investigators in any different cases are asking our journalists or people who know our editorial office if there is something interesting in Gazeta Wyborcza, something which seems fishy or something which could be suspicious. So they are simply seeking for, something they could catch on and use in any formal investigation about us. And if you look on that whole from perspective and using a historical method, then you have a feeling that something like that happened somewhere in Europe, in our neighborhood. And in the 30s, in one country, there was a judiciary that was demoted. That was the free press, which was totally controlled by the government. And it was, authoritarian regime, which then committed terrible atrocities against their people. And well, if you look at it all from a historical perspective, yes, well, you are simply frightened. And that's why I believe we should be frightened now, what's happening in Poland about that.
Thank you very much, Bartosz. I'm going. Well, I'm going to remember something that you said at the beginning, and you said if I would have been asked 3 years ago, I would have actually said that we were successful, and something happened, and so the situation has changed. So our next speaker comes from Hungary. He's Gabor Polyak. He's the director of Mertek Media Monitor in Hungary, and I'm curious to know if you could also, in Hungary, you could also put a date or some years in which you can say, yes, there was before and after, you know, and how it was before and how it's now. I mean, what are the challenges that you are facing now that it was not before, you know?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, absolutely, it is about this difference between the before and after, and our date, our changing point was 2010. Even if the Hungarian media system before 2010 was not a perfect one, there was political pressure, there was huge debates. But if you looked at the media system of Hungary before 2010, it was very similar to all Western European media systems. We had owners from Germany or from the whole Western Europe and from America. We had free journalists who could write anything or say anything without fearing on the consequences. So it was a good experience for a young democracy. It was not perfect, but it was the good way. In 2010, that was a big change. I am not a journalist, so my perspective is a perspective of a researcher and academic. So I don't have so deep stories, but the whole picture is very worrying. What we experienced after 2010 is a new media transition, new media transformation. The first media transformation was the transformation after the change, after 1989. And the result of this first transformation was this not perfect but democratic new media system. After 2010, we experienced a very successful political occupation of all institutions dealing with media issues, but not just the institutions, not just the legal side of this story, but that was also a perfect occupation of the market. Now we have, for example, a media authority, media council, with just nominees, with just members nominated by the Fidesz, by the governing party. They have a mandate for 9 years. Next year they will be re-elected. But Fidesz has a new 2/3 majority. It is no question that this biased, this politically homogeneous media authority will remain. We have, you asked the situation on public media. I would say in the law you can read about something about public media, but we don't have any. We have a state media, we have a Fidesz media, party media, exactly.
Oligarch media.
This is the market side, but the public media is functioning as a state media, is functioning only for the political interests of the governing party. It is absolutely biased. It is spreading the government propaganda, and there was an election campaign, as you know, in the last months, and it was possible for this so-called public media that in the morning show there was no opposition nominees invited, just the nominees for the governing party. There was a claim against it, and they got some sanction, but it was a very small sanction. But it was, of course, nothing what you can call as public media. If there are no debate, if there are no opposition point of view in your program.
Gabor, sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you something? Because I think that I think you also have quite a pretty good knowledge about local media, if
yes.
I'm correct. So I think that that's, for example, is interesting because I think in the case of Hungary, it might happen in other countries, I don't know, but in the case of Hungary, there is also a difference between what happened in Budapest and what happened in the rest of the country. So it would be interesting also if you can tell us a little bit about the local media.
Yeah, it is a good example for the functioning of this distorted market, the local level of the Hungarian media market. And it can be described, the whole procedure, what happened in the last years. The most important local media outlets were and are the regional dailies. Regional dailies were owned by Western European publishers, 4 big Western European publishers. After 2010, all of the Western European investors left Hungary, so do these publishers of the regional dailies. And in all cases, the buyers of the media outlets were the oligarchs, were such businessmen who has very strong ties to the Fidesz. And it means now that at local level, we have the oligarch media, we have small local newspapers owned by the local municipalities. They are functioning as an advertising newspaper for the mayor. Mm-hmm. We have local radios owned by one of the biggest oligarchs. So there are no local public sphere in Hungary anymore. It is just a one-sided propaganda sphere. And the result of this situation, you can see also in the results of the election in April, because as you mentioned, you have a picture in Budapest and you have voters in Budapest, and the proportion of Fidesz voters in the countryside was much more higher than in Budapest or in the bigger cities in Hungary. So this distorted public sphere at local level has absolutely strong political consequences.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to move now to the Czech Republic, and Gabor was mentioning, for example, now this issue of oligarchs buying media. I don't know if there is, this is something that happens, or actually it doesn't happen in Czech Republic, because I think there is also some kind of interesting stories about this in Czech Republic. And well, if you can tell us a little about the situation there. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't introduce you. Our next speaker is Václav Stetka, and he's a researcher. And he's a researcher and expert on media policies at the Liverpool University in the UK.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. I will get to the oligarchs because we have plenty of them in the Czech Republic. But let me first start by, and one of them is actually Prime Minister, indeed. But let me first start by a brief remark on this significant decline in the World Press Freedom Rankings, which Czech Republic experienced this year, as we have been reminded by Pauline in the morning panel. This might have come as a surprise to many, given the fact that Czech Republic has been long regarded as a sort of a safe haven for media freedom, consolidated democracy, which has been avoiding the lures of illiberalism and authoritarianism, those things which have been plaguing the other countries in the neighborhood. But I would actually say that, and I would argue that this slump in the rankings has been long overdue, and given that the fact that some of the processes or tendencies mentioned in the report by the Reporters Without Frontiers have been observed in the Czech Republic for some time already. So I believe that the current ranking reflects the situation of media freedom in the Czech Republic in a more sort of realistic way. It's a more realistic assessment of the actual situation of media freedom in the Czech Republic. It is not all that grim. It does not warrant the same kind of apocalyptic language we are hearing from Hungary, for example. There are obviously still some big differences, but at the same time, it is a warning signal. It is a red light flashing that something wrong is happening. There are some tendencies which should be tackled in order for the Czech Republic not to slide even further down the rankings. So I was asked to mention some of the key challenges to media freedom and pluralism to Czech Republic at the moment, and I decided to mention three. The first one has already been briefly mentioned by Pauline again in the morning session, and I mean the increasing verbal hostility towards journalists coming from political actors predominantly. And Pauline has reminded us kindly of some of the rather scandalous actions by the Czech president Miloš Zeman, or scandalous to those who are not familiar with President Zeman's rather perverted sense of humor, manifested in his conversation with Vladimir Putin when he suggested that there's too many journalists and therefore they should be liquidated, or by waving the dummy Kalashnikov with the inscription on journalists or for journalists. So some people might brush off these incidents as basically examples of just poor tastes by the Czech president, but many would disagree, especially because of the fact that they are coming from the head of the state, and as such they help normalizing these kind of hostile attitude, and we can even say hate speech towards journalists. These are not so isolated incidents. There has been a pattern, and this kind of rhetoric has been repeated and used by other political actors, and obviously that encourages other people in the public to repeat those hostile language and create the atmosphere and environment in which attacking journalists verbally is completely normal. And after the murder of Jan Kuciak in Slovakia, the journalists themselves became much more concerned about how far is it from the verbal attacks to the physical attacks. So I would say this is definitely worth mentioning. The other point or problem concerns the increasing attempts to restrict political independence of public service media in the Czech Republic. As we know, independent public service media are generally regarded as one of the key pillars of the democratic media system in Europe and beyond. And Czech Republic was fortunate enough to have enjoyed the reasonable level of political independence of both Czech television and Czech radio for quite a long time. Of course, far from the ideal set by BBC or even far from Germany, but decent enough to stand as an example to other Central and Eastern European countries. But this is now, this position of especially Czech television is now under threat because especially after the 2017 elections, which brought to power or increased the significance of populist political parties, there have been an increasing calls for either nationalization or privatization of public service media, Czech television especially. Even Prime Minister Babiš has not restricted himself in verbal attacks against Czech television. He called the reporters corrupt vermin just because they were too nosy, digging into his shady business affairs and reporting about his the criminal investigations and other scandals he's engulfed in. So there is a danger that with the increasing power and significance of these populist actors, there might be an atmosphere created within which the public will start thinking, well, maybe we don't need public service media after all. I'm not saying we are at that tipping point yet. After all, there have been a counter-reaction from the civil society. There have been demonstrations following these scandalous remarks by both President Zeman and Prime Minister Babiš against Czech television. People went on the streets, thousands and dozens of thousands of people demonstrated in multiple cities of the country in support of Czech television. So there is some hope and resistance as well. And last point, but not the least, those are the oligarchs, because some people in this audience might be aware of the fact that the vast majority of mainstream news brands in the Czech Republic are in the hands of local businessmen, oligarchs, if you will, who purchased these news outlets following the retreat of foreign German owners after the financial crisis. So most of these news brands essentially serve as instruments of political or business interests in the hands of these oligarchs. Some of them do it more manifestly than others, and those ones which belong to the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš are well infamous for their practices of self-censorship and silencing of the scandals which Andrej Babiš is surrounded by. So if you want to know something about the current police investigations into Andrej Babiš's affairs, don't look at front pages of the newspapers owned by Andrej Babiš. So I think I would stop here and perhaps leave some of the good examples towards the second round of the debate.
Wonderful. So thank you very much. Thank you, Václav. So our next speaker doesn't have an easy task because he's going to start actually to speak about solutions. So he's Benedek Gabor, and he's a member of the European Parliament. He's a member of the group of Greens European Free Alliance in the European Parliament. And I have asked him to actually be the one that's starting to provide solutions or to propose things, how to address these challenges. So I'm sorry for putting you in that situation. Just to summarize a little bit all of the things that we have been hearing here today. We have been talking about the increasing attacks against journalists, verbal attacks against journalists from public authorities. It was also mentioned this morning several times, starting by, of course, we mentioned to Donald Trump. We have talked also about the increased attempt to capture public service broadcasting and making public service broadcasting less independent and actually a governmental television or broadcasting more than a public one. We have talked about the role of oligarchs capturing or buying media in local or national media to influence the public opinion. We have been talking about threats against investigative journalism, of course, and those that are investigating corruption, which are probably the first target of those that want to silence media. We have also talked about judicial harassment and in other ways to administer or other ways to harass private or independent media. And we have also talked about, about independence, the role of the independence of the judiciary and how important actually this is also for ensuring media freedom. So, Benedek, you have the floor to tell us if from the perspective of the European Union, what could be the ways in which we can try to address these challenges.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and perhaps it's not the most polite thing to do by a guest, but I will start with a bit of criticism regarding the title of our panel, which is How to Reboot an Essential EU Pillar. And I think that perhaps this includes the heart of the problem. My conviction that media freedom was never a pillar of the European Union. And that's the problem, because basically, and the approach of the European institutions in the past couple of years or decades always was that media issues belong to the member states. It's a member state competence, and EU institutions, including the European Commission, has very limited rights to interfere and to intervene in media issues in the member states. And I believe that that's the starting point. Where we have to begin our analysis and to find a solution, because I believe that, and my thesis to be elaborated here within 5 minutes, is that we cannot continue like that. media, of course, is in a multiple crisis and transformation globally, and there is a lot of challenges for media, including the digitalization, the concentration of ownership and capital in the media markets, the free content and social media issues, the fake news, Russian propaganda, and so on and so forth. So there are global problems which are hitting media markets, independent and quality media all over the world and in the EU as well. Also, there are some new developments in Europe, including those tragic murders we've seen in the last 1 year, including the Galizia murder in Malta, the Kuciak murder in Slovakia, but recently the attack in Montenegro, which is the nearest neighborhood of the EU. And also we had to experience something unexperienced before in the EU, and this is the direct political pressure on media markets in EU member states. First of all, the example of Poland and Hungary are most often mentioned, but I think that the situation in Bulgaria or Croatia are also very alarming and concerning. So I believe that there is a completely new situation in Europe regarding the media markets, partly because of the global trends, partly because of some new developments and events which were not experienced before in the EU, which means that I think that we need a completely new approach in Europe regarding media and media freedom and pluralism. First of all, and I think that that's the hard basis of this new approach, that the European Union and the European Commission must have a responsibility in media issues. The EU cannot hide behind this dogma that media law and media issues belong to the member states, because there are alarming developments in the member states' media markets, and if there is no free independent quality media in the member states, there are no democratic member states, and without democratic member states, there is no EU. So it's so simple that if we really believe that the EU should be maintained and developed, then we have to pay much more attention to the freedom of media in the member states, and this cannot be pushed over the member state governments that they should do something, because these are the governments themselves who are oppressing the media. The second lesson to learn, I believe, that the entirely and purely legalistic approach which was followed by the Commission for a long time is not effective. We heard a lot of examples from Poland, from Hungary, from Czech Republic, but from each and every member states, I think we could find examples for that media law is more or less okay in the member states. And if there are some problems regarding the media law, and Hungarian government had conflicts with the European Commission 7 years ago when they introduced the new, or accepted the new media law, but through legalistic approach, the effectiveness of European actions are very limited. Because with more or less stabilized and acceptable legal environment, the governments are able to completely distort the media markets without violating directly legal norms of media law in the EU. And in Hungary, which I know the best, the market concentration, which was mentioned by Gabor, or, for example, the National News Agency decided to provide news for free, which means that each and every media outlets use those free news from the National News Agency, which without a legal oppression meant that the governmental view of, or the governmental approach to the political developments is mirrored by most of the media outlets, regardless if they belong to the government or they are close to the government or not. State advertisement is a problem. Politically occupied authorities, taxation policy, biased, politically occupied public broadcasters turn into propaganda channels. And we can continue the list till late in the evening. None of them are violating European media-related laws or they can do it, that the Commission has serious difficulties to find how to control them. But also in Slovakia, for example, what was mentioned by Pavel Szalai in the previous panel, that this police interrogation of the Czech journalist Pavla Holcová is something which is not a media law-related issue. Still, I think it undermines the independence of the media, or those strategic lawsuits which are aiming nothing else but to intimidate the journalists. Again, sometimes are not completely illegal, but they are very good measures and tools to undermine the independence of media. So, first of all, the EU has to realize that it has a huge responsibility and cannot hide behind this dogma that this belongs to the member states. Second, they have to give up this entirely and purely legalistic approach. I think that we need a clear commitment and courage from the institutions and the Commission in the case of media freedom as a common concern. And in a way, this needs a political approach and political courage. I believe that when the EU is fighting with regimes within the EU which are undermining the basic fundamental rights and values of the EU, the European Commission cannot behave like a neutral, legalistic institution which is the guardian of the treaties, but is not involved in political discussions. Those member state governments are involved in those political discussions, and they are attacking fundamental rights and values of the EU in a political way, and I think that we need reaction, political reaction from EU institutions. And of course we need, besides of that, and I think that we have to, I already had to finish, legislative support to independent media. But
it's okay because you are doing the link between the two. So
yeah,
now
so
they have now we have a second round, and you are doing the first and the second at once. So don't worry.
Good.
I give you 1 minute.
I'm not coming back, but still have the opportunity to mention some possible solutions. So we need better or more effective legal protection for journalists in the widest possible sense. It's not only journalists themselves, but for example, whistleblowers, journalistic sources should be protected on the EU level in a much more effective way than they are. And when we initiated 4 years ago to have a European directive for the protection of whistleblowers, that was in our mind, and now we are there that the Commission came to the public with a proposal for a horizontal whistleblower protection directive. I think it's a very important development, but what we need much more. We just started a couple of months ago to initiate European measures, legal measures against strategic lawsuits against journalists, this anti-SLAPP proposal we made with some of my fellow MEPs. But also besides of the legal protection, we need financial programs, because partly because of the global transformation of media, quality investigative journalism is in trouble. And we cannot expect that only those media outlets should finance quality investigative journalism. I think the EU has to contribute to quality journalism. Also, I initiated 4 years ago to have European financing scheme for the support of investigative journalism, and I am happy that this March the program was launched by the Leipzig European Center for Press and Media Freedom. But it's a small-scale program, and we need much more. We need a fixed budget line in the post-2020 European financial scheme for financing media, quality media, and independent media. And of course we need much more, but again, and let's be this is a last remark, yes, that what we see from the Commission, that again they found the problem in the bucket of hundreds of problems regarding media in the EU, which raises the less concern regarding the member states, and that the fake news and Russian propaganda issue. And now the Commission just jumped on this problem and announced programs how to fight against fake news and Russian propaganda. It's important. We have to do that, but it's just one part of the problem. And what I see that the Commission decided to deal only with this because with fake news and Russian propaganda, they don't have to take conflicts with any of the member states, perhaps with the exemption of Hungary, where the government and the public media is the biggest consumer and provider of Russian propaganda. And
also in Poland, it can be some problem, despite of the former anti-Russian rhetoric of the ruling party.
Yeah, Latvia.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will give you even a few more seconds because I have a question for you. So, you start your presentation saying the European Union must have responsibility on media freedom. And it's interesting because the European Union has guidelines for those in the European Union neighboring policy. There are some requirements that those states are supposed to meet to enter the European Union. The European Union has also approved, I don't remember, it was like 3 years ago, I think, guidelines on freedom of expression for their work outside of Europe, in the sense in their developing, I mean, when they do development programs or things like that. So they have done it for the outside of Europe, they have done it for those that want to be in Europe, but they have not done it for themselves. So I think that's related with what you say, that the EU must have responsibility. So in your view, from our perspective, that we are here either advocates for media freedom, journalists, media outlets, owners or journalists, what can we do for that to happen? I mean, what kind of pressure we have to put on the European Union for that to happen? I mean, if we actually coordinate pressure, is it feasible?
I believe that this question goes far beyond the media market. It is the more general discussion on the rule of law within the EU. And the EU has this dual nature, as you mentioned, that while a country tries to join the European Union, there are very strict norms and expectations regarding those countries, the Copenhagen criteria, and so on and so forth. But once a country joins the EU, there is no any effective measure or tool to force them to implement fundamental rights and values. And that's what was first realized in the case of Hungary, and already in 2013, where the infamous Tavares report in the European Parliament was adopted. And that was the most important conclusion of the Tavares report, that the problem is that the EU has no any effective measure to force the member states to keep themselves to be in line with fundamental rights and values. Media markets, media freedom, media pluralism are just part of that. On the long run, I believe that the solution is really to set up a kind of Copenhagen institutional Copenhagen procedure which is able to sanction the violation of fundamental rights and values in the EU, because while a member state violates, for example, economic guidances, economic governance policies of the EU has very strict sticks in its hands to punish the member states. Let's take the example of Greece, which was quite heavily asked to follow the financial guidelines of the EU. But when it comes to fundamental democratic rights, there is no any measure, any tool in the hand of the European institutions to force the member states, and that's what we experienced in Hungary, and it was told to the European institutions, and already since I am in the European Parliament, I'm continuously telling them that Hungary is not a Hungarian case because it's infecting other countries. They learn from each other. Then Poland came, and I think that Poland is not the last domino.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that because we started, I don't know who I have to ask, but I'm assuming because we started 45 minutes late, I have a little bit more time, so I'm using it. I'm using it, so I hope it's fine. So before going to questions from the public, I want to make a kind of a quick second round, because otherwise there will not be really time for question and answers. But for the other panelists, specifically on concrete proposals for solutions. That's what we want to hear now. We want to end this because that's the last panel in a positive, in a positive mood. So if you can be very brief, so we can leave 10 minutes or 5-10 minutes at least for some questions. So I had already two panelists here that they were asking to say something. So I don't know, for example,
so
Gabor,
if I may start.
And we changed the order.
I do agree, we need European support, we need money from European grants, for instance, for journalists, for not only for, because all the grants we have been receiving by now, for instance, development programs, development aid in America, Black Africa, Southeast Asia. That's not something which we need now. We need greater focus laid on internal issues, investigative reporting inside Europe about European problems. The problem of current editorial office is that we are losing staff. We simply can't manage that through all those punches we have received from the government. We had to fire our best editors, best contributors, and we need simply money to rebalance it, to hire them, to rehire them, or to find new person. But that's only one issue, money. The second thing, which I think is and I believe is as much important as the money, is the courage. And you can buy courage, and the European Union won't provide us with the courage. The first, we need the courage of editors and journalists, just to remain in those besieged fortresses. Editorial office became in our countries, in Poland, some kind of fortress where we are defending democracy, liberalism, Europe, and other virtues. So courage is required to stay there, not to abandon the ship before it sank, but to remain on duty and serve. But the other courage is the courage of the owners of the media. Mark Dekan from Axel Springer left the Saal, unfortunately, but his enterprise, his company, received a lot of demands from the ruling party to sell something to them. Mark is publisher of Newsweek Polska, Polish edition of Newsweek, which is extremely anti-governmental. They are attacking the government very hard and hated. The editor-in-chief, Tomasz, is one of the most hated person by this government, and he received demands, just sell it. We can pay a lot. How much do you want for them? And Dekan said, no way, we won't do that. Unofficially, we know about it. Other media owners also received such demands. But in Hungary, they sold out. They say, okay, we don't need any problems with the government. We don't receive any, the income is bad, the prospects are bad for print media. Let's get out of that. Let's sell it. So we need courage of the owners, and we also need politicians abroad in Western Europe to encourage the owners not to sell, not to retreat, to keep on the ground and to give people, the support.
So if we have to do a recipe, let's put about 3 kilos of courage. Would be good, or a little bit more, maybe.
I'd say 3 kilotons.
3 tons, okay.
Kilotons.
So I was asked by Mirosław if you can,
I try to be brief. I would like to maybe relate a little bit to what Mr. Benedek said about the European Commission and its competences. I would like to remind one fact, that actually within the rule of law procedure against Poland, there was media law for half a year. In 2016, up to July 2016, in communications regarding the position of the Constitutional Court, there was also doubts and problems regarding media law I mentioned. But I don't know why. The Commission has never explained it. The Commission dropped it. So the media law was lost in action somewhere. God knows why. But I think there is, actually within the EU law, the situation has changed from December 2009. The European Commission is a guardian of the treaties, and the respect for freedom and pluralism of media and the freedom of expression is a fundamental right protected by the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Whenever member states apply EU law, it has to be also safeguarded. I think what we also need is we need clever lawyers, professional lawyers, asking national courts to send preliminary questions to the European Court of Justice. It's the legal path, the power of law to protect freedom of media is still something we have. I hope so. Even if I come from a country where there is lack of proper constitutional control, and you can believe that political power has predominance over law, but this is still the method which can be used. And I believe as a lawyer that in the European Union, with jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice, with the Charter, it can be litigated.
Good.
And also, maybe only last sentence, in Poland, we need independent monitoring centers. Like, for instance, there was a special program within Helsinki Foundation, monitoring freedom of media. It's very weak. It's not financed. So we need, especially in those countries, they have problems. We need to support independent NGOs, independent monitoring centers, also to
Mirosław.
act.
Thank you. So we have five ingredients so far. Courage, investigative journalism, strong European Union responsibility. I don't even know what I put here. The other one, but I'm going to find out for the next. So, Backlab,
I might want to add another item on your list, following up on what was already said about the need to encourage media owners, the independent media owners, to stand ground and to keep their businesses running against the odds, against the pressures by politicians, by political parties. Well, the problem is that, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are not too many independent media owners left anymore, at least not in many Central European countries. And therefore, whatever independent journalism there is, it's usually or mostly to be found outside of the spectrum of mainstream media, so on the alternative sides. And these kind of media outlets, many of them have been established after this big structural ownership changes. They need some support from the local business community. I think that it is essential to mobilize not just the public to convince people to start buying, supporting, become subscribers of these independent news outlets, but also to mobilize local business community, businessmen, and corporations to adopt and acknowledge and embrace corporate responsibility for or in support and for protection of democracy in their own country. I think that something like that is starting to happen in the Czech Republic. There are a couple of independent foundations that benefit from donations, multiple businesses and private donors, and that foundation supports investigative journalism. I know that it's an idealistic prospect, but I think it's worth trying.
Well, nothing is idealistic. No? Let's think that everything is possible. So, Gabor, you wanted to mention, and then I'm going to with Tomasz.
Yeah, just a sentence for this. In Hungary, I would say there are no companies anymore who would be able to have advertising in independent media, because all companies can be threatened by the government with taxes, with procedures by the tax authority or something like that. It is useful to a point, but Hungary is after this point.
So what do you do after that point?
Yeah, okay. I am not agree that the European Union and its institutions are so powerless, because if we see the problems of the countries, of the media systems in these countries, these problems have several times an economic nature. And economic problems are the problems that can be handled by the European law instruments. If we don't speak about media freedom, but we are speaking about state advertising, then the misuse of state advertising, the spending of state advertising regardless on the real audience of the media outlets, it is a forbidden form of state aid, state supplement. If we are speaking about the biased program of public media, then there are no European instruments for this problem. But if we are speaking about the financing, the over-financing of public media for having the loyalty of these media outlets, then it is a question, again, of state aid. There are European instruments, European tools. And we know that in case of Hungary, there are pending cases, and I don't know why the courage of the European Commission fails to decide in these cases. It is very interesting, because these are not complicated, not difficult legal tools, economic legal tools, what are used in several cases, and there are in the hands of the European Union. And two other ideas. Very short. Yeah. With Poland, we discussed many times about that. Such institutions like Reporter Without Borders, but also Freedom House, are ready to save journalists in the worst situation, when they are imprisoned or they are really in danger. But these organizations don't have the toolkit for this hybrid situation, but we in these countries have. So we have to think it over, how to avoid the worst case, how to avoid the imprisoning or the violence against journalists. And it is not impossible, but we haven't fought it. And the last thing, yeah, one lesson of the Central European countries, what we learned, that the Western investors are playing with the government. And maybe it is too late, but this is the point when we can say it. It would be useful to have an ethical code for media investors. And it could be used also for a situation when they leave a market. Of course, ethical codes are not so strong, but then there would be something that we could give the German government, that it is this ethical code for your companies, and they are not following it.
Thank you, Gabor. So last word for Tomasz, and then we are going to take, we don't have other time, 2-3 questions, no more, 2 questions.
Story in the history.
Well, I agree that if we want to combat the factors that endanger the political and also economical factors that endanger the free media, we need some European regulations, something like harsh financial punishment for the government that use public media for the ruling party propaganda, or favorite the government-friendly media with government advertising. Also, I think maybe it would be good if we had some mechanism which would help the media companies that want to buy itself out from the stock markets, because the stock market is short-term profit-oriented, and the truth is not a short-term profit. It's a long-term investment seeking for the truth, and so the stock market and financial market logic not always is good for the media companies. But generally, I think that what we can do as journalists is to cooperate in a transnational way, as I know it from my own experience. Our investigations and researches are transnationals, and I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't know nothing about the situation, for example, of Bulgarian journalists before I came here. I'd like to recommend what Reporters Without Borders are doing. I'm thinking about, for example, about the Forbidden Stories project, when the journalists that are in danger know that other colleagues can take over the story from them and to continue the investigation even when the journalist in prison. It's a great idea, and I hope that all that was told here will be a seed of the renewed solidarity of European and not only European journalists.
Thank you, Tomasz. So let's take, do we have questions? I see 2. Good. So we have time for 2.
So much pain in the back. I would have to make more a remark than a question, because I think we should discuss realistically. And I think it's totally unrealistic to think that we can change the European treaty within a few weeks. And the fire is burning in many, many member states. And if we wait 5, 6, 7, 8 years to change the contracts, then the fire is gone, there's nothing to burn anymore. And I'm afraid that the idea to have more responsibility could be discussed, but I think it's a long, long, long way. And the second, we don't discuss Strasbourg. Where is the Convention of Human Rights? They sleep. And and that's the reason why the European Union was not in the value business. It was in the economic business, historically. The value was Strasbourg, and business was Brussels. And that's why it was like a school class in Strasbourg, and everybody thought the same about freedom of press and religion and human rights, etc., etc. And then we opened the school class for new members. And then we were romantically thinking they learn by being member of the school class. And that's the mistake, and that's what I think we have to analyze before we think about a solution. And I think that the European Union has no treaty for bad days. The contracts are only for good days, and that's the key message. And I think that Mr. Oettinger has a good idea that the financing should be hooked a little bit to whatsoever. But it's not realistic to think that the constitutional right of freedom of press is part of the European Charter. The European Charter is only for the acting of European institutions, and freedom of press is a right, an individual right against the government, against the state. And that's exactly the point, and that's legal, and that's constitutional, and that should be much more cared when we discuss that, so we don't mislead people maybe in wrong expectation that there could be a solution here or a solution there. We have to start much earlier than these long-term projects.
So someone want to react to this comment or these remarks? Or we move to the second question?
Just short. That's why I mentioned the tools what are existing now at the European level. They are there. We could use if the European Commission would be ready to use them.
I mostly agree, and particularly with that we have a treaty of good times and we are living in bad times. But I think that this raises exactly the question that we need a treaty which is valid for good and bad times alike. Which doesn't mean that we do not need quick help and some survival kit. And I believe that partly, and I'm truly convinced that the Commission and EU institutions have much more in their hands than they effectively use. But still, I see the problems, the shortcomings of the competences and rights of the European institutions. So I think that the two things do not exclude each other. We need the short-term solutions, and I'm fighting for that with trying to find money for cross-border investigative journalism to achieve a better legal protection for journalistic sources and whistleblowers and so on and so forth. But these do not solve the fundamental problem. And also we have to have a vision how to fix those problems which are there in this Treaty of Good Times.
So we have to stop the fire, but also to think how we are going to build, rebuild the house in a way that it's resistant to fire. So, Pauline.
Yes, it's a question for Mr. Bentek-Javor. You were one of the first to raise the question of an emergency fund for investigative journalists inside the European Union. That was before the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia. From my point of view, there was a raise of awareness, and unfortunately, the second murder also was another raise of awareness, and the attack against a journalist in Montenegro last week was another shock. We don't need all that shocks, and what we hope that it is that the murders will be prevented, like it was in Italy last week or very recently. I think, and I would like to have your opinion, that we are now, the conference itself is very depressing. I mean, all the issues that we discussed were very sad and depressing, and I think we need to be optimistic. I think, unfortunately, these murders have shed the light on these problems, and I think my question is, do you think that being united, like we are all, like different countries today, but also different investigative journalists working together more and more often, will help to solve these issues? Because my feeling is that there was a change from June last year to May this year, and I think now we are able to build things together and find more solutions. It's unfortunate that we have to, there were these murders, but it's changed things.
Well, I believe that we have a bunch of problems, and we have to find solutions for each of them. So I think that different kind of initiatives and proposals could help in solving different problems. And I think that this is, so we shouldn't wait to find the perfect solution for everything. But we have to be very active, and in this sense I'm optimistic that we can be active to provide, to invent and to introduce, to implement different kind of solutions, being it an emergency fund for Central and Eastern European media markets or independent journalists in those member states, being it a better legal protection to the journalistic sources or anything like that. And I think what is really important is to put it on the public agenda. And this is very unfortunate, but it's true that those murders we had in the last couple of months, this really pushed back at the issue of media freedom and the situation of the media and journalists into the heart of the public discourse in the EU. And however, this is really sad, but once we are there, we have to use this really to raise even more awareness around the problems of media freedom. And how those activities and cooperations between journalists or gatherings, conferences, petitions, anything like that, can contribute to the solution. Sometimes you don't know, but you have keep on going. And well, Winston Churchill in 1940, the summer of 1940, in the middle of the Battle of England, he told that when you are going through hell, you should keep on going. And I think that we are not going through hell, so we are fortunate enough not to be there, but we should keep on going. And I truly believe that all the activity journalists, politicians, NGOs are doing regarding media freedom issues, in a way they pay back and they contribute to the solution. Perhaps not the same way we intend to do, but you have an effect and you can make the change.
About the cooperation. A month ago I discovered I need help from somebody in Montenegro, and I asked myself, how the hell I found somebody in Montenegro? I don't know nobody in Montenegro. I came here and I discovered that there is somebody in Montenegro that needs my help. So the cooperation is the hope, and it's easier and it's closer as a solution maybe than we think.
So, thank you very much. So I'm going to try to end in an optimistic and positive way, Pauline, so this is not pessimistic. And I would say we live with some ideas on the table. Of course, to really create a strategy, concrete strategy would require like a working meeting to put things, but at least the Sofia declaration that is going to be presented now will be a start to put some things on the table to discuss and to work on in the future. And as we said, for reasons that are unfortunate, but there is probably an opportunity now to make some changes because that's the environment right now in the European Union, and so let's make use of it. And finally, thank you for all the courage that is in this room today, because there are wonderful people doing amazing things. Thank you very much.
Декларацията ще бъде представена от Мари де Куртуа, която е юридически съветник в ЕМПА. Заповядайте.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our conference today, but it's a constructive end because we will conclude with some concrete solutions. So 21 years after the UNESCO declaration, we have decided to also come forward with a Sofia declaration. So I was tasked by ENPA President Carlo Perrone and ENPA Vice President Valdo Lehari, who unfortunately had to leave, so I have to excuse him, to present the declaration to you today. Also on behalf, of course, of all the wonderful co-organizers I had the pleasure of working with on this. So Union of Publishers in Bulgaria, Reporters Without Borders, EFJ, our sponsors, CMO, European Association of Journalists, and we are, and of course ECPMF, sorry. I think that what you will also read in the Sofia Declaration, of course, is about the various challenges, the economic challenges. So one thing is the really economic challenges coming from a disconnect between the power of the platforms in the digital sphere and then the content creators as media production and so on. We, of course, have the specific challenges that were raised today by all the really wonderful speakers. True pressures, governmental, sometimes also pressures coming from powerful people on journalism. Of course, the murders of journalists have just pointed out that even in the EU, it isn't safe to do your work as a journalist. I would add today, as a conclusion, that I think that maybe and I agree with Pauline, that maybe it was a little pessimistic today, and for next time, we could focus a little more also on the wonderful opportunities and the way ahead for the media and what we have as value and where we could thrive and actually be the masters of our own destiny. Opportunities, why? Because I think, again, if you go back to the digital sphere, we can communicate with more people than ever before, and we can just see that we have more readers than ever before, millions of people. And the only thing we have to solve is find a way to monetize it and also find safety to do it. These are the two constants I see today. But I want to continue by then reading some of the proposals that are in the declaration. I think that we should keep the declaration open to more contributions because the panels and discussions and really useful discussions have highlighted other solutions that we might not have included in the declaration. So, and also I think that of course, our Serbian friends should be allowed to add a couple of sentences regarding their situation in their country. So I think that it should be regarded as a first draft, and also we should vote on it all together at a later stage when it has maybe more voters here. But let me just quickly resume what solutions we would like to come forward with. So policy recommendations. So journalists, publishers, NGOs, stakeholders must join together to defend mechanisms of the Court of Justice of the European Union, of the European Court of Human Rights. One practical idea could be creating a legal expert entity, Media Freedom Advocacy Fund, that assists citizens, independent journalists, publishers, and media companies in applying international laws against the abuse of power of the local governments. Such funds could also initiate and support independent international investigations of high-profile media pressure cases in EU member states. Also, maybe linking EU funds to values as well. The European Commission should extend the newly proposed regulation linking EU funds disbursement not only to the rule of law, but also media freedom in member states and candidate states. Another solution that has been highlighted is, as the media business model is in transition and that it has these economic challenges, it would be good maybe to encourage EU funds, maybe to invest directly in investigative journalism, just like Benedikt Gabor suggested earlier. Also, promote innovation and assist digital transformation of EU media. The EU must develop a more diverse instrumentarium to help bridge technological gaps between European media companies and global platforms. I must add, however, that there is huge investment already from leading media companies, but maybe it should be more widespread. Even small SME media companies should have access to the latest technology to give the best services to their readers online. Also, last but not least, there are actually solutions and policy solutions on the table right now in the EU. We have these publishers' right, which is part of the copyright reform, which should allow press publishers to enforce the rights they already have and better negotiate with the platforms. This is something that will be voted on soon in the European Parliament and at the Council. So this is maybe today a call on EU stakeholders. This is something you can change now and make it better for press publishers and help finance journalism. Also, in addition, VAT rates should be aligned to the digital sphere. So there should be same VAT rates for the press on the digital sphere as well. Also, there should be a level playing field, generally speaking, between all players in the digital sphere. We should always take care and make sure that regulation takes account of not sanctioning certain sectors and giving a competitive advantage to others. Please feel free from now on to add to this declaration. Maybe we can, put together some system to add new contributions.
So I expect this not to be the last event. Maybe
And
we'll have another one
as
with
we
different
said,
countries.
then
we will have the chance to amend the declaration. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Right now we should go for it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Изглежда да сме почти на време, въпреки разместванията в графика. В заключение, какво мога да кажа? Днеска аз споделям мнението на Полин, че днеска някакси конференцията е сравнително тъжна. Да, ще ви дам думата. И в такъв план обаче има и нещо радостно. Радостно е, че всички, които имат проблеми в различните държави, всички, които се опитват да правят свободна преса и са потискани, са мачкани и прочие, днеска видяха, че не са сами. В край на кращата проблема е систематичен, не е просто в една държава, а би било добре. Би било чудесно да бъде само в една държава, бихме били много щастливи, дори това да е само България. Не е така, факт. И предстои много работа, защото в край на кращата би трябвало да искаме да живеем в свободно общество. Потиснали се пресата, изманипулирали се, затворили се, контролирали се, това рано или късно си отива. Свободното общество си отива заедно с свободната преса и в това няма абсолютно никакво съмнение. Плурализмът е витален за нашите свободи. Това е най-важната свобода. Благодаря на всички. Госпожо Бодакова, видях, че искате думата. Заповядайте. Давам думата на госпожа Бодакова, като е главен редактор на вестник Монитор, който е собственик на господин Пеевски. И точно заради това, ако беше негото, нямаше да я дам. Съвсем сериозно. Заповядайте.
От тук? От вашето място? Може би от вашето място, съжалявам.
То нали е въпрос всъщност. Ако може ли да включите микрофона? Да, работи. Молбата ми е само да не е много дълго, защото наистина искаме да завършим.
Няма да бъде. Okay, thank you very much for the word. I'm taking it just to say that I have to strongly disagree with some of the highlights in the declaration you have just said that was approved. Well, it is not by all the participants. I will proceed in Bulgarian because there are Bulgarians who are watching live streams. So thank you very much for the understanding.
Okay.
There is an English translation, I believe. Trust so? Yes, thank you. Така, аз съм много далече от това. Съжалявам, че съм ви загърбила, искам. Наистина. Смисъл. Да, много се извинявам.
Добре.
Благодаря, мисля, че така е малко по-удобно за всички ни, иначе щяхте да ми гледате гърба. Много далече съм от това да твърдя, че медийната ситуация в България е цъфтяща. Категорично не е. Самият факт, че вестника, чийто главен редактор съм аз, и медийната група, към която той принадлежи, от година и половина, между другото първи, обявиха борба на фалшивите новини, е достатъчно показателен за това, че не, ние не цъфтим. В никакъв случай. Това, което искам да кажа обаче, е, че виждам в тази декларация в частта за България. Аз благодаря на колегите от чужбина. Беше много интересна презентацията им. При всички случаи ще се опитам да се запозная по-обстойно и с ситуацията в другите страни. Но това, което мога абсолютно категорично да ви кажа, господин Захов, много надявам се, че не се чувствате неудобно до мен. Това, което категорично мога да кажа е, че частта за България е пълна с фалшиви новини. И ще ви обясня защо. Защото аз говоря винаги с факти. Преди да стана менеджер в вестника си, аз бях разследващ журналист. Продължавам да се считам за разследващ журналист, въпреки че съм натоварена с ръководни функции. Това, което виждам, е цитиране, че през последните 8 години премиерът на България се е радвал на комфорта от контролирани от господин Пеевски медийни кръгове. И тъй като господин Пеевски, който е собственик на издателската група, към която принадлежи Монитор, е изключително стриктен в собствеността си, неговата собственост може през цялото време да бъде проследена в търговския регистър, държа да отбележа, че приемам това твърдение персонално. По простата причина, че Монитор е част от групата, която е негова собственост, която група, между другото, се състои от 6 издания, а не както се твърди в бялата книга, която е пред вас, далеч повече. И нека да ви кажа следното. Ние не правим конформистка журналистика. Именно заради това не съм съгласна с този хайлайт. Напротив, именно защото не правим конформистка журналистика, сме атакувани. Но ние също така не правим критика заради критиката. Ние критикуваме с факти. За хората, които проследят изданията ни, веднага ще видят, че има статии, които критикуват състоянието на здравния сектор. Впрочем, господин Захов, тук е момента да кажете, че господин Донев е забранил, той сам си го каза на предишната конференция, да потвърдите, имам предвид, е забранил в неговото издание да се пише за фармацевтичния сектор. Ние за сметка на това правим на разследвания за фармацевтичния сектор. Също така пишем за корупция и съмнение за корупция в обществените поръчки. Също така пишем за съмнение за корупция в други сектори, включая и в сектора на вътрешния ред и целия хаос, когато има такъв. Но също така критикуваме хората, които критикуват ето така заради критиката и хората, които се опитват да използват журналистиката за кои икономически интереси. И далеч не говорим само за примера, който току-що дадох с фармацевтичния сектор. Нашата група беше единствената подложена на цензура от институция държавна, като Централната избирателна комисия, преди година и половина. Изкарахме 2 книги с разследвания и те бяха забранени. До ден днешен не могат да бъдат дистрибуирани, защото бяха забранени. В същото време виждаме ето това твърдение тук. Нашата група и журналистите от нашата група бяха оставени, с извинение за сравнението, като кучета пред залата преди няколко месеца, когато беше представена ето тази бяла книга на корупцията и медийната свобода. Това какво друго, освен цензура? Господин Дончев, не знаете ли? Господин Прокопиев, вие бяхте организатори. На този фон наистина съжалявам, че вашите истини, колеги от другите страни, по този начин бяха замърсени с една пропаганда. Това е изключително жалко. И тъй като тръгнах отзад напред, госпожо Десмевел, всъщност щях да ви попитам по повод класацията на репортери зад граници. Без граници, извинявам се. А откъде идва огромната бездна в позицията, която ни дават репортери без граници? 111, говоря за България, защото аз съм български журналист и служа на български интерес. Позицията, която ни дават Репортери без граници 111 и позицията, която ни е дадена в индекса на демокрацията и свободата на словото, сега ще завърши господин Захов, благодаря за търпението, позицията, която ни е дадена в индекса на свободата на словото от Economist Intelligence Unit, достатъчно престижна анализаторска група, която е 49-та. Би трябвало да се замислим, че такава огромна разлика означава някъде манипулация, може би ви манипулират в анкетите, не знам. Аз до ден днешен не познавам журналист, а аз имам 20 годишен опит в журналистиката, който да е попълвал такава анкета. Но всъщност въпросът ми е друг. Чухте ли колегата си от ОССЕ, който каза, че 2/3 от журналистите в Холандия миналата година са се оплакали от това, че са били заплашвани? Знаете ли на коя позиция сте сложили в рейтинга Холандия? Защото аз проверих. 3-та в световен мащаб. Миналата година е била на 5-та. Дори сте й дали 2 позиции по-напред. Много ви благодаря за търпението и възможността да кажем нашата истина, защото тя е подкрепена и с факти. Благодаря.
Единственият коментар, който ще направя е, че въпросът към господин Медел беше зададен преди това, за разликата в позициите. Мисля, че Репортери без граница са твърде авторитетна организация, за да поставяме под съмнение техните заключения по отношение на свободата на словото. Напълно никак не съм изненадан от позицията ви да не приемете някаква част от декларацията. Единствената, може би, неточност е, че най-вероятно може да се позовете на това, че всъщност медиите, които господин Певски притежава към днешна дата, бяха собственост на неговата майка до преди няколко години. Може би това е някаква неточност. Но че директното притежание и влиянието на една цяла група медии също така е факт, мисля, че без дори формално, защото вижте, можем да бъдем много формални, но можем да бъдем и фактологично позовали се. Всичко това се вижда от редакционната политика и то затова е така и записано. Ако четете внимателно, тези неща не се твърди. С това приключвам. Благодаря на всички. Между другото, благодаря и на вас, че бяхте тук, защото все пак някакъв диалог може би има смисъл да има. И малко подобрение да има в вестникарската среда в България след тази конкуренция. Толкова да е, от полза е било. Но аз мисля, че ползата ще бъде много по-голяма. Благодаря. С това завършваме.